Listen-only mode.
Good morning everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar today. My name is Emma Wall and I'm the event coordinator at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Our webinar today will be presented by Matt Walton from InfoExchange. Matt will provide an overview of the features of Office 365, explore the benefits other organisations have gained from making the move to the cloud, and identify factors that organisations should consider when planning the move to Office 365. At the end of his presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. We may also take some questions during the middle of the webinar. If you have any questions, please type it in the question box on your webinar panel and we'll go through them one by one. I would now like to hand the webinar over to Matt.
Thanks Emma, and hello everyone. Welcome to this webinar about Office 365 implementation considerations. I'm very excited to be presenting to you all today. I've been working in the sector for about 20 years with not-for-profits, so I can definitely understand the importance of your time and your money, so I appreciate taking an hour out of your day today. But hopefully with this investment of an hour today, we'll be able to save you some time and money down the track when you're implementing Office 365. So today, what we were planning on going through, as Emma mentioned, is I'll give a little bit of an overview of what is Office 365. Now, a lot of this may have already been covered in previous webinars that have been run in Connecting Up, so I won't double up too much in terms of a practical demo or some of the basic information about Office 365, but I will drill into some detail about how to implement it and what are the key features. The Office 365 benefits is an important one that I will spend a little bit of time going through and helping you, I suppose, justify implementing Office 365. I'll go through some of the stages of implementation, so if you do choose to implement Office 365, here are some of the ways that you could stage it that would help reduce risk and save some money. And then I'll go into a little bit more detail on each specific application that's part of Office 365. The two big ones are obviously Exchange Online for email, calendars and contacts, and SharePoint for documents and tasks and intranets. And then I'll also talk about Yammer, Lync and OneDrive as well. I'll finish off by talking about how to build the business case and justify this to your boards or your CEOs. And then I'll have a suite of other resources of where to go from there. And obviously I'll leave probably about 10 minutes at the end for some questions. I will also say that if you have any other questions that we don't get to cover today, please jot them down, and my email address was both at the start on the first slide and it will be on the last slide. So feel free to contact me afterwards, and I'm happy to either have a phone conversation or reply to some of those questions directly. Now, we will send out the PowerPoint slides, so Emma will send out a PDF over the next week with this, so you don't frantically need to take notes, but obviously feel free to jot down things that are relevant to you that you need to remember. Now, so InfoExchange, being a not-for-profit and working solely in the not-for-profit sector, has supported more than 50, it's actually probably a lot more than that now, but not-for-profits to move to Office 365. Now, those organisations, plus many more, range from organisations that only have 1 or 2 staff to ones that have over 1,000 staff. So it is suitable for a broad range of organisations, and all of the content today was developed keeping our experience with these organisations in mind. So we have learned a lot of tips and tricks and gotchas and seen issues that I'm hoping to provide you with some of that experience, so that when you're looking at your Office 365 implementation, I can hopefully save you a bit of pain by raising some of these potential issues as well as the benefits up front. So starting from the start, what is Office 365? So many of you will have already done the other webinars or done some research, but essentially Office 365 is Office applications, so things like SharePoint for document management, Exchange, Lync, Yammer and OneDrive. Now these are all products that previously you would store on a server. So many of you would probably have Exchange servers in your office. So this is an application that is now hosted by Microsoft and offered to you as a hosted service so that you no longer need that local infrastructure for your Exchange. Office web apps are also, most of you would be used to using Microsoft Word and Outlook for your email and Excel for your spreadsheets and PowerPoint. You can have these web apps online, so it doesn't matter what PC you're working on or if you've got the latest version of Office at home or in an internet cafe or wherever you're operating from. You can actually operate from Word Online and these other applications. So being hosted by Microsoft, it's always up to date. So instead of running constant updates of your servers and PCs and every 2 years having to upgrade from Exchange 2007 to Exchange 2010 to Exchange 2013, you're always on the latest version. So there's no updates whatsoever. And it's optimized for a range of devices. So even though it's a Microsoft product, it can work on Macs, it can work on iPhones, it can work on Android devices, as well as obviously PCs. The reliable service with a 99.9% SLA. Now, what that means is Microsoft have guaranteed to both not-for-profits and their corporate customers that they will have this service available 99.9% of the time. Now, typically that is a lot more often than if you had Exchange running on your server. And to back that, they give financial refunds essentially to their paying customers if they don't meet that SLA. So it's Microsoft putting their money where their mouth is essentially and saying, look, we're going to guarantee that it's going to be up 99.9% of the time. Exchange, SharePoint and Lync. So as I mentioned, then they used to be server products. SharePoint used to have to buy a SharePoint server or a SQL server, sometimes a web server to host your SharePoint locally. This Office 365, it just comes as part of the package. Industry trusted certifications are another aspect of Office 365. It does have a lot of strong controls around privacy and security. We'll come back to that later because I'm sure there's a couple with some questions around that aspect of it. So, what is Office 365? Now, you see I mentioned up there in brackets E1 plan. Now, E1 plan is the plan that not-for-profits, or eligible not-for-profits, now get free from Microsoft. So anything in this slide, if you're eligible, which most not-for-profits are, there's a few exceptions around healthcare and those type of areas, but that's a process that we can check reasonably quickly and connecting up can help with as well as far as the eligibility goes. But typically if you're eligible for buying your Office 2013 licenses through Connecting Up, you're eligible for Office 365. So with the E1 plan, you get 50 gig of mail in Exchange. Now I'm not sure how much you have at the moment, but 50 gig is a lot of mail. Personally, I think I might have 1 gig, and I consider myself a pretty heavy user of email. So I haven't seen anyone fill up 50 gig of mail. So it's pretty generous storage capacity there. Instant messaging, so that's, we'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail later, but Lync is your platform for instant messaging, video and audio conferencing, and screen sharing as well. Where it says online storage for 1 terabyte and collaboration and document management. So online storage you get 1 terabyte of data. Now again, I said 50 gig was a lot of data. 1 terabyte is a massive amount of data, and you get that, each user gets that in their OneDrive. So I can store a terabyte of documents or images in my OneDrive as by default. Now you also get additional storage in SharePoint. Now again, we'll talk about SharePoint a little bit more later. Strong privacy and security controls again. You see the note down the bottom. So I mentioned before around Word Online and Excel Online and PowerPoint Online. These are if you want to operate from any PC just in a web browser, so using Google Chrome or Internet Explorer. Now we usually recommend that most people purchase Office 2013 from Connecting Up. I think it's $40 at the moment, and that lasts you a couple of years until the next version comes out, and some of them even come with software assurance so that you can continually update it. But what that means is you can operate using Outlook and using Word on your desktop PC like probably most of you are doing now. So that really, from a user point of view, if you've got Exchange on a 2007 Exchange server in your office, but everyone's using Outlook, if you change your Exchange server to Microsoft Online, Exchange Online, and you keep using Outlook, users probably won't even notice the difference. So it does help with that seamless transition. The other thing to consider is there is what we call an E3 plan. Now this is basically the top level premium plan that Office 365 is offering through Microsoft. And the charity pricing for this is $6.38 per user per month. Now it's obviously optional, and you can choose to mix and match. So some users can be on the free E1 plan and some users can be on the E3 plan. Now some of the reasons why you might choose to go to this is Office Pro Plus. So I mentioned a minute ago that you can get Office 2013 from Connecting Up for $40 for 2 years. If you pay this $6.38 a user per month, you actually get Office 2013 or whatever the latest version is. So when the next version comes out, it will provide you that automatically. You get that as part of this plan, and typically it comes down to a maths equation to say how many $6.38 do you add up to equal your 40, and obviously the 40 does seem a bit cheaper. But one of the reasons why you can use this Office Pro Plus as part of the E3 plan is you can install it on up to 5 devices using Click to Run. Now what that means is I can have an E3 plan as part of my work. I can go and install that on my home PC, or if I'm going to use that for work, or multiple Office PCs. I can just log into the Office 365 portal and click, and it basically downloads the software locally on your PC, and then it keeps that up to date. Now, we've seen a lot of organisations, regional organisations, use this. So instead of sending an IT guy out with a USB key, install Office 2013 manually, they can just get their users to install Click to Run, and often that can be an efficient way to do that install. Some of the other ways that you can benefit from the E3 plan is the mobile apps. There's actually advanced editing for Word, Excel, PowerPoint on the mobile apps. So there is now mobile apps for Android, iPhone, and they're actually quite good. So you can get an Outlook web access, one on your iPhone, Word Online, Excel Online. The mobile apps are actually, with the E3 plan, they're more advanced and they enable you to edit more, if that is a priority for you. The next point there was around advanced email. Now, some organisations were really sensitive about their information that they're sending out and receiving. So we worked with the Community Legal Centre recently, and they were really strong on this area where they wanted to track every email that went in and out of their organisation and be able to keep each of those emails for 7 years. Now, this basically puts a hold on your email and stores a copy of it. So even if the user deletes it, it will keep a copy in Office 365 for you, so that if in 2 years' time your CEO wants to go back and see what was sent or received, you can actually do that. It also has some, gives you additional archiving and unlimited storage. eDiscovery Center, so this is just a bit more smarts when you're working around SharePoint and Exchange for searching and some of those tools for finding information when you get a bit more advanced. And business intelligence, so again, when you're getting a bit more advanced in Excel and integrating with SharePoint and your SQL databases, there's some really nice business intelligence tools that are getting better and better and able to be used, particularly for larger organisations. So both of those bottom two take a bit of technical expertise to configure, so they're typically for the larger organisations. So there's some of the reasons to choose the E3 plan, and you can switch and swap the plan. So if you go on the E3 plan for a month and you find that the mobile apps actually don't do what you want them to do, you can just drop back down to the E1, the free E1 plan for the next month. All right. So when we talk about the benefits of Office 365, what we're talking about here in this slide is actually some research that was done by Forrester. So these next two slides are all based on actual research of 60 organisations. Now this was in the US and UK, but it is real data that they've identified the benefits that these organisations found. And the reason why I'm putting it up is because they're very similar to the benefits that we find with the organisations that we work with. So there is some consistency there with the Australian not-for-profit sector from the benefits that these organisations found and the benefits that you can find that we see every day. So technology is really the benefit. So the savings associated with not having to buy and replace hardware and software is really significant. So for example, this refers to if you've got an old Exchange 2007 server in your office and the hardware is out of warranty or the software is very quickly becoming out of date, Office 365 really offers that benefit of moving to the cloud instead of having to replace both that hardware and the software. So there's significant capital investment involved in both of those. Even though we get software pretty cheaply from Connecting Up, it is still an investment. So being able to replace that is really the key benefit, but also the ongoing management and maintenance of those servers and the improved uptime. So as I mentioned before, we see organisations with a server in their office, they need to reboot it every month, it has bugs and issues, they need to pay for spam filters. There's a range of other things that go along with owning a server and maintaining a server, and particularly those ones that just sit under desks or they're high risk for theft or water damage and those type of things. The disaster recovery associated with Office 365 is a lot stronger than some of those environments. Mobility, so if you've got, say, a document server in your office, we see many organisations where they can only really access those documents when they're in the office. However, if you're storing documents in OneDrive or SharePoint, you can essentially access them from anywhere on any device. So I can see on my OneDrive on my phone and access documents if I need. Alternatively, we you set up tablets using the apps that we referred to before. Control and compliance, so essentially that cost of maintaining the control, and we talked a bit before about legal hold and some of those more sensitive aspects of data and reporting of that. Some of our contracts and agreements with government have some rules there around compliance, and Office 365 can help us meet those. Business intelligence, so again, some more advanced features around the opportunities to make better decisions when you've got access to that data. And enterprise, so collaboration, I'm sure is a topic that many of you are interested in, and working out how your organisation can work better together and communicate between remote locations and different teams within your organisation. So Office 365 can help us do that. Now, this is a more detailed graph of the benefits from that study. Now, I'm not going to read out each of these in detail. It is similar to how I said on the last slide. It's really reducing your costs. As you can see, the top three are all about reducing costs and expenses associated with managing and buying infrastructure. So I might move on from that. Now the next slide, I'm sure there's some questions out there about privacy and security, so I thought I'd cover this off reasonably early. And we can come, there's some other resources that I can link you to at the end about this. But essentially, many of you may have heard that Office 365 is coming to Melbourne and Sydney in March. Now, the caveat to that is if you're currently on Office 365, it may actually take them till September for you to migrate across to the new data centres in Melbourne and Sydney. So currently, your data is stored in Singapore if you're on Office 365. Now, for many organisations, that's okay. For some organisations who may have it in their government contracts that data must be kept in Australia, that's worth considering whether you would move your data to Office 365 before it's in Australia or not. So, as I said, we see a lot of organisations moving across already. There is some strong security controls, and it really just depends on what information you're storing overseas. So some people choose to store all their client information locally in a client management system, but things like email and some standard policies and working documents, they're okay to put up in SharePoint or OneDrive. So really it is a decision that each organisation has to make on their own, and each board has a different level of acceptable risk. So there are a lot of resources out there. There are a lot of links in this slide pack and on the last page around Microsoft giving assurances and giving more information about where the data is stored. What I will say is the security controls are very strong. If you look at how Microsoft manage their data centers and the access to that, and they are very strict about their security. And while a lot of organisations want to learn a bit more about that, what we often see is we walk into a small not-for-profit and they're asking us about security controls, but they've got a server sitting under their desk right next to a window, and anyone can basically break that window and walk out the door with their server. So it's balancing that, I suppose, need to understand the security and comparing that to your current levels of security and privacy. So as I mentioned before, the privacy controls are very strong as well, so they are accredited in a range of privacy areas, and more than most other cloud providers, Microsoft do pride themselves on those strong privacy controls. The other one is you own and retain all your rights to your data. Now, What that means is if you choose to leave Office 365, you can take every bit of information with you. Now, some other cloud providers don't actually allow you to do that, but Microsoft do. So that's an important aspect, that if you wanted to, if you went to Office 365 and then decided that it wasn't for you and you wanted to reinstall an Exchange server or move to Gmail, then that's okay. You can take all your data and migrate across. So, really when we're talking about Office 365, now this is a live, not a live, but a picture of what Office 365 looks like in your browser. And you can see there are a lot of different applications to Office 365. So this is my screen. I have Outlook, Calendars, People's, Yammer, OneDrive, Sites, so that's SharePoint, Tasks, Word Online, Excel Online, PowerPoint Online, OneNote, and then an admin console is where you manage your users. Now the one thing up there that mine's a little bit different, I have CRM integrated with Office 365 as well. Now many of you won't do that, but just so that you're aware, Microsoft Dynamics CRM can actually be stored in Office 365 as well. Now that's a totally different project and a totally different license structure, so it's definitely not part of your E1 plans. But if you are already considering Dynamics or you have Dynamics for CRM, that's something that you may consider integrating. Now, implementation staging. Now, as you saw in the last slide, there are a lot of aspects to Office 365, but you don't have to use them all. And if you do use them all, you don't have to implement them all at the same time. Now, I've given a case study here because every organisation is different. So I couldn't put it up there to say, we always recommend stage 1 is this, stage 2 is that, because everyone's different. And some organisations will just use this for SharePoint, some organisations just use it for email, and some use it for everything. So I've given this case study. This is an disability services organisation called CLASS that we've done a lot of work with over the last year. And look, they're 250 users, so across 10 regional locations and 5 different programs. So they are a large, reasonably complex organisation. So this staging, this 5-stage approach that we've got here won't be suitable if you've got 4 email users and you're all in one office. But for those sort of mid to large organisations, this is something that is worth considering, how you stage each different aspect of Office 365. So you see there the first stage wasn't even related to Office 365. They reviewed their IT strategy in general. So they did an audit of what PCs they had. They looked at where they were headed as an organisation and what their priorities were. They looked at what systems they had and where Office 365 could fit in. So they knew they already had a payroll system and a HR system and a finance system they were happy with, so we didn't really need to consider those apart from some integration points. They knew from this that they needed to upgrade some of their PCs. They knew that they were about to buy mobile devices for a lot of their services, so we needed to consider that as part of the implementation, how we do mobile devices. They knew they had a lot of messy infrastructure and a lot of messy users, so they actually cleaned up about a quarter of their users from their list, which saved the effort of bringing them across as well. So really that first step is more looking at the big picture and working out where Office 365 fits in. Now the second stage they chose, because they had an old small business server that was groaning under the weight of the pressure, and it was causing them some issues with speed, and people accessing documents on that server was very slow, and so they decided that they would move their email off that server as quick as they could so that they could focus on using that server for other things. So the first priority for them was, okay, let's move our email across, and while we're doing it, we may as well include Lync for video conferencing, because it's actually reasonably easy to activate Lync as part of Office, and which we'll cover again later, and Office 2013. So part of Office 365 is there are some prerequisites, so it won't work on every version of Outlook, for example. So they had some old versions, the old XP machines, they had some old Office 2007. So to really utilize the full functionality of Office 365, they chose to, okay, let's upgrade all of our machines to Office 2013, because whenever you're changing your email system, you actually need to go out to each machine and reconfigure your Outlook. So while you're out there, you may as well spend an extra 20 minutes, upgrade Office 2013, and then configure your Outlook for that. So they chose to do that all in one step, which we typically recommend. Now, once they finished their email, they chose to focus on really working out, sorting through all their documents and working out their architecture for an intranet. Now, to be honest, this was actually happening in parallel to stage 2, because some of it was different people. So they actually started this a bit earlier, which is good, because this can actually take a little while. It probably took them a few months to sort out all their documents and work with one of our consultants to come up with what's the best structure for an intranet, and what documents are we going to move across, what are we going to keep locally, what are we going to store on OneDrive, what are we going to store on SharePoint. So really that was a planning process that had very little to do with technology or Office 365. That was more assessing their business processes and working out their permissions, for example. So who needs access to this information? Who needs access to that information? So it was really that business analysis component. And once they had all that done, then stage 4 was, okay, let's set up a SharePoint site and use it for our intranet and document management. But a big part of that was training and change management. So they implemented OneDrive, they implemented a high-level document structure for their shared documents for their organisation, so policies and procedures, and essentially replacing their local file server. But they also started working on, and this is leading into stage 5, setting up team sites. So for every one of their teams and those 10 locations, setting up team sites for each of those 10 locations where they can store their own documents, have their own little news feeds, have a bit of collaboration across Yammer and SharePoint. So look, we'll flesh some of those points out a little bit later, but that's a sample of staging and how you can do a couple of things at a time where you can work in parallel, and it also depends on your local resources. So obviously if you've got one person in the organisation that's trying to do everything, from your email to your SharePoint to your Yammer, then that's a little bit harder to do things in parallel, but it's all the more reason to stage things separately. But if you've got different departments, keeping in mind this isn't all an IT function. This is in the architecture and planning. You should have your senior management team. The comms team were very heavily involved in the SharePoint intranet. The IT team and their local contractor were very involved in the Office 2013 upgrade. So across this whole 5 stages at class, they involved a range of different stakeholders and engaged them all through the process. Now, we were lucky here. We had a really great individual that helped facilitate all of that and did all the local sort of leading that. and that's always great. If you can have an Office 365 champion in your organisation that can rally the troops and organise it, that's always helpful. So I might pause there just for a minute and ask if anyone has any questions.
Thanks, Matt. We've got a few questions here, so I'll just start at the top and work my way down. Does the Office Pro Plus come with software assurance?
From Connecting Up, yes it does.
Okay.
If you're buying the Connect, yep.
Sorry, Matt, go on.
So you can buy Office Pro Plus from anywhere, but the $40 Office Pro Plus that you buy from Connecting Up does come with software assurance. If you get Office as part of E3, that just constantly updates. So for the next, as long as you have Office 365, you'll be on the latest version of Office.
Okay, and how does the free E1 deal from Microsoft work with Telstra?
It doesn't. So if you're on Telstra and is essentially a competitor to Microsoft, and while they were originally offering Office 365, and they still are, it is totally separate arrangement from the new free Microsoft. So if you're a not-for-profit currently on Telstra and you're wanting to access the free E1 licenses, you actually need to migrate all of your information off Telstra onto Microsoft, which we've been doing a lot with a lot of organisations, but it is a reasonably difficult process and a technical process to essentially download all the information from Telstra, reconfigure it in Microsoft, and then upload it.
Okay, and does Microsoft offer any tools to migrate current SharePoint Foundation 2010 intranet sites to SharePoint Online?
Not any good ones. We personally at InfoExchange, we have bought a third-party tool called ShareGate that we use to migrate full sites across from SharePoint on-premise to SharePoint Online. But in saying that, we also recommend for organisations, a lot of organisations want to review their SharePoint as part of this process. So in some cases, it's actually better to start from scratch and just upload the information that you need into the new Office 365 SharePoint instead of bringing it all across.
Okay. Can you integrate Salesforce easily with Office 365?
It depends what you mean by integration, but essentially not really. Salesforce can link to your email system if your email's on Office 365 and you want Salesforce to send out emails, which it would. It doesn't integrate that well with, it does integrate with your email system, Exchange Online, so you can send out emails from that. Salesforce does have an Outlook plugin, but it doesn't integrate as far as authentication like you probably saw on my screen where I had my CRM, which is the same username and password as Office 365. That was Dynamics CRM. Salesforce can't do that. They're separate companies.
Okay. And can New Zealand organisations have their data saved in Australia?
Yes, you can. Yes.
Okay, and the other part to that question was, do you know if New Zealand is limited by privacy issues and saving data overseas?
New Zealand does have their own privacy rules and laws and their own privacy commissioner, so it is a little bit different to Australia. I believe I've actually got on the last slide, the resources slide, I think there's a link to the New Zealand privacy resources and information, but if there's more information required, I can send that afterwards, or feel free to email me.
No worries. And just one more question. We'll ask them more at the end of the webinar. But what is, I think it's B1 or BI capability in E3?
Yeah, so you do, that's a bit of a complex question I might have to take offline. So there is a lot, so you may have heard of Power BI, so that's a component of it. There is sort of more default business intelligence tools that you can integrate with Excel and SharePoint as well. So yeah, we probably don't have the time to go into that in detail, but I'm happy to take that offline.
Great.
Okay, thanks everyone, and as we said, we can reconvene some questions at the end. We are running a little bit behind time, so I might try and skim through some of these. So the next part of it, what I was hoping to do is really look at each application and try and just give you some key tips for each application about when you're implementing it. So again, today's session wasn't about really fleshing out what the functionality of each application. It's more around what to think about when you're implementing. So Exchange Online, obviously you've got calendars, you've got contacts, you've got email. You can use it both in the web browser and you can use it in Outlook. So typically what we recommend, the first thing you need to do is audit your current infrastructure and work out whether you need to upgrade your internet, hardware and software. So hardware, look, from a software point of view, Microsoft XP is not supported by Microsoft anymore, so typically we recommend Windows 7 as a minimum and Windows 8.1 as a preference. Obviously Windows 10 is coming out soon, which we haven't had a chance to test, but I'm sure it will be much better integrated with Office 365. Software, we usually recommend Office 2013, but it can work with Office 2010. It just means you might need to install Lync and OneDrive separately. Internet, now I've got a slide at the end of this that talks about internet and minimum hardware PC specifications, so maybe reference those if you're worried about your internet and hardware. The internet does depend on what you're going to use it for. Now, if we're referring to just Exchange, if you're just moving Exchange, really your emails are currently going out over your internet connection anyway. So if you're on Gmail or even if you're on Exchange server, it's not going to make a really huge difference to your internet bandwidth, except the syncing locally from your Outlook. The second thing, review your current users. What we're finding is most organisations have a pretty messy Exchange or Active Directory, and there's a lot of users in there that they no longer need. Now, you do get unlimited number of users in the E1 plan, so there is technically nothing stopping you from bringing all your users across and then sort of storing them there as disabled use. But it's up to each organisation. But when looking at what you're bringing across, it's not just your mailboxes, it's your shared resources. So things like room calendars, car bookings, projector bookings, distribution lists, public folders. So all of those different things, if you're migrating across, all of those need to be thought about and essentially migrated differently. So public folders, they're quite difficult to migrate, so are distribution lists. You can definitely do it, but it requires a bit more technical expertise to do that. The third one, resource both the technical and non-technical components of the migration. So yes, it's easy to just get your IT contractor to do it, but there needs to be someone in the organisation who can manage the change and the non-technical. So working out what documents you want to keep, or from an Exchange point of view, working out what user accounts you want to keep, that's a non-technical task that is more probably suited to an admin person or someone on the ground. and working out if your current IT contractor has the expertise. So look, there are a lot of IT contractors out there that are starting to pick up Office 365. Now traditionally a lot of them focused on servers and managing local exchanges, so there might be some resistance to moving to Office 365 if they don't have that expertise. But yeah, really it's assessing, do you have the expertise to do it yourself, or do you need to ask for help? And the fourth one is often the most important, is consider the change management, communication and engagement of key stakeholders. So this isn't something that you should be doing with an email on the Thursday saying, okay, we're moving everything on Friday and it'll all look different on the Monday. So it is something that you just need to manage carefully. So some of the factors when you're talking about email migration to help you come up with a plan is the size of your organisation. Obviously, some of these are a bit obviously obvious, but the type of migration that you choose does vary depending on your size. Coexistence, so what data do you have? Is it really, do you have a complex SharePoint environment that you need to move across? Do you have a lot of distribution lists and public folders? Or is it really just 3 mailboxes with not that much data in them? User provisioning. Now, how are you going to set up your users in the new system? So, look, you can do a basic export of users from your local exchange, but if you've got 500 users, we'd sort of look at doing that in a bit more of an automated way. Source. So where is your mail coming from? Is it on Exchange? Is it on Gmail? Lotus Notes? Each one of those is different for how you would migrate based on each of those. So getting all this information together is important. Identity management. Now that's basically how are you going to manage your usernames and passwords. Can you get away with having one username and password for all of this? Or is Office 365 going to be separate and they'll all have separate usernames and passwords? These are typically the migration options. Now, I don't think we have time to talk through each of these, but based on the plan of the last slide, what we're seeing is a lot of small organisations are just going for this top one, the Outlook. Basically, you export your PST file from Outlook and import it into the new Outlook in Office 2013 or whatever you're upgrading to. And that's a reasonably simple way to do that, but anyone with over sort of 30 users, we'd recommend trying to automate that a bit more. And that's where you look to a cutover migration or a stage migration. And anyone with sort of over 100 users who wants to stage their migration over a couple of months, we'd recommend a hybrid deployment. Now again, this is a pretty complex technical setup where you need to have servers in your environment to have the mail flowing through for that stage period. But this just gives you an idea when you're going to talk to your contractor or thinking about how you're going to do it. These are some of the different ways that you could do it. Now, there are a lot of variables to this, so I can't necessarily say now everyone under 30 must use PST and everyone between 30 and 100 users must use a cutover. There are a lot of variables that contribute to that, as we mentioned on the last slide. So, as far as email goes, really it's picking one of those migration options and then implementing it. So, and again, we recommend working with someone technical, particularly if you're looking at the bottom 3 there, cutover, staged and hybrid, where there's a lot of work on the server. We recommend that you have some IT expertise for those. SharePoint. So, as you can see on this slide, SharePoint can be used for a lot of different things, intranet, project sites, team sites. So the key really is, what are you planning on using it for? Some organisations purely use it for documents. Other organisations purely use it for project sites. So it's really assessing why we're using SharePoint and is it the best solution for us. If you've got a lot of big files and you've got a server on site and you want a document management solution, maybe your local server is suitable. So it's really doing that assessment of what is the purpose of it. Auditing your current systems and information architecture. So looking on your file server to see how many documents you have, what structure it is, and whether that is the structure that you would want to bring across. Assign people to lead and own the project. So again, it's not just IT staff. SharePoint in particular, particularly for intranets, can be driven really strongly from the comms teams and does need involvement with your senior management. So it is, if you're using it for document management, it's something that will impact every staff on a day-to-day basis. So it is something that everyone needs to be aware of and contribute to. And the cultural implications of a shared approach. So people are used to storing things on their desktop. They might get a bit of a fright now that they're going to store things in a shared environment. Now you can obviously do permissions in SharePoint and lock that down, but it is a different way of working. Now I'm skimming over SharePoint a little bit because there was a previous SharePoint webinar as well that Stephanie ran last week, and I want to leave some time for questions. So just to differentiate between OneDrive, which is Morph, we usually recommend it by user and not for corporate files, because when a user leaves, if you delete their account, all their OneDrive documents will go with them. So if you're talking about corporate documents, it's best stored in SharePoint. And it can be stored offline. All right, so a key thing with SharePoint, what will your information architecture be? So setting out for each library where are you going to store your information and finding something that suits your organization. All right, now I'll just skip quickly to link. Now again, review your internet connections. Use Link 2013, which comes as part of Office 2013. Use headsets. And even enable external sharing. So some other organisations that we work with, like Connecting Up, we have them on our link and share with them. Yammer. Yammer is essentially the Facebook for business that Microsoft are dubbing it. So it is like a social media type platform that we'd encourage. And you can create groups for each team or topic. We have social groups as well as one for each department. It has a desktop client, so you get a pop-up if you want for when people post new things, and you can integrate it. So that bottom picture there, that's a feed that's embedded in our SharePoint site. So you can integrate the two, and you can transfer from the free platform if anyone's already on there, but that's a process Microsoft need to do for you. OneDrive, we've sort of already mentioned. Use the desktop client to sync your files. Resolve any errors really quickly, otherwise you can get some version issues. And really try not to use it for sort of important files that need to be shared. So, very conscious of time, so I'm just going to really skim through these because we have already sort of covered most, but top 10 tips. You can stage it, implement the most important ones to your organisation first, involve your staff through the process, review your bandwidths and make sure it's suitable, particularly for Link and OneDrive syncing, upgrade to 2013, use an expert if you don't have the internal expertise, consider local storage if you have large videos. Not everything's suitable for SharePoint, so it is best to sort of assess that. Review your security controls and policies around permissions and what you should store and what you shouldn't. consider using your Active Directory synchronization to have a single sign-on and those same password for Office 365. Collaboration spaces can be used for your board or volunteers and Yammer. So the business case, look, we've covered a lot of these, but really this is some tips that you can use to really sell to your board and justifying those savings, like we mentioned in that study originally. Final thoughts. Again, these are non-technical, but consider your user communication, choose your migration approach that suits you and whether you're available, whether it's okay to be down for a few hours or whether it has to be seamless, might dictate how you want to do that migration. Engage a contractor if you need it, as well as non-technical staff, and build the business case. So, I've got a slide there for some more resources and some more support, but I might try to open to questions while those slides are up there, and remembering that you'll get this slide pack anyway, that Emma will send that out. All right. Emma, any questions?
Yes, we've got a few, Matt. Thank you. Does Exchange Online... Sorry?
I was just going to say, look, I'm happy to go over if other people are, and I'm conscious I skimmed through that last bit and went over time a little, so I'm happy to stay around for 10 minutes and answer questions, even if other people have to duck off.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, so the first question is, does Exchange Online include any anti-spam filters, or is a third-party service required?
No, that's a good question actually. Yes, it includes anti-spam, and we haven't ever seen any issues. We very rarely see spam in Office 365 for Exchange, so typically we don't see the need for third-party filters.
Okay, great. Can we use Office 365 for just file sharing and the calendar and continue to use our regular email, phone and internet provider, etc.?
Yes, you can. So we have some organisations that just use files. Just to keep in mind though, the calendars are typically part of Exchange, which is your emails, but you can also do calendars on SharePoint. So essentially you could keep your emails with your current provider and just set up SharePoint for calendars and documents. So yeah, we see some organisations do that.
Is there a business premium level on Office 365?
For not-for-profits, probably the premium, what you would call the premium is E3, is the E3 plan. That's essentially the top level plan that gets everything. Now Telstra and other not-for-profit sort of offerings, they have what they call business premium, but essentially it's the same as E3.
Okay. Can OneDrive be used for internal staff and to share files with external customers like Dropbox?
Yes, you can. I think as I mentioned previously, important files that are important to the organisation, we usually recommend they store them on SharePoint. But if it's purely just you're putting a copy in your OneDrive and sharing them, yes, you can do that with OneDrive. Keeping in mind, you can also do that with SharePoint. So you can set up a site in SharePoint or a document library and give external access in SharePoint as well.
Okay. And has there been any indication when Lync will become Skype for business?
Yeah, it's so it is coming Skype for business, and it will be a gradual process. So it's actually starting in March, so you'll gradually see it come across, but it also will depend on what desktop version of Lync you're using. So it will just gradually change, bits and pieces will gradually change, similar to how they change OneDrive from SkyDrive. I believe it will just gradually change over the next sort of 6 months.
Okay. And what kind of internet connection is recommended for Office 365?
Yeah, I'll just flick to one of the appendices. Look, it depends what components of Office 365 you're using. So if you're, as I mentioned, if you're just using ADSL and you've only got 10 users using email, it should be fine. However, if you've got 100 users or 10 users at a time using Link video conferencing, you probably would want to look at upgrading from an ADSL to an Ethernet, or over 100 users, you're probably looking at a fibre connection. But each ADSL connection is different as well, depending on your distance from the exchange and some of those technical components. So we see some ADSL2 connections working with 20 users and some not working with 10 users. So it really depends. We often just recommend you can, particularly if you're just starting with email, you can just try it and upgrade later. Yeah, sorry if that didn't give a definitive answer, but it's typically we recommend doing a speed test on your internet and seeing what that comes back as, and if your current email system is handling it, your Office 365 email system will probably handle it too.
Okay. Just got time for just a couple more. Is SharePoint on-premise being discontinued? Yes, discontinued. Sorry.
Not that I'm aware of. Not that Microsoft has announced.
Okay.
So,
does Exchange Online integrate with SharePoint Online for tasks?
So typically, yeah, tasks, you can do tasks in SharePoint or you can do tasks in Exchange. If you do tasks in SharePoint, you can sync it with your Outlook. So I can see my SharePoint, I've got a SharePoint project site with a heap of tasks. I can sync them with Outlook, but the tasks don't necessarily sync with Exchange, if that makes sense. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. So we'll take one more, and as Matt said, his email address is included on the slides, so feel free to email him. So the last question is, if we use SharePoint to replace a file server, are all documents full text searchable?
The search function on SharePoint is quite configurable, and there is a component in the E3 plan that can even make it better. So the answer the long answer is yes, but there may be some work involved in setting that up.
Okay. Thank you, Matt, and thank you everyone for participating today. We will be sending an email to you with a link to the webinar recording as well as a copy of the presentation slides. Don't forget to check out our website, newsletters, Facebook and Twitter for information on our upcoming events. Don't forget registration is also open for both conferences, one in Adelaide in South Australia and Wellington, New Zealand. Thank you everyone and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.